Well, one of the biggest thing I'm going to be talking about is the coming ice age, because that's the title essentially of my website, iceagenow.com, and also the title of one of my books, Not by Fire but by Ice, or generally the title. But we are, I hear all of this talk about global warming, but there's a cycle to ice ages that if the climate modelers would put that cycle into their climate models, they'd be coming up with an entirely different scenario. And this is not something that I've invented. This is a cycle that's been known since at least the 1970s. And so that's what I'm looking at. And a big part of this, and a big part of what I'm talking about, is that glaciers are growing right now in the United States. And I have a feeling that a lot of your viewers are not aware of that glaciers are growing right now in Washington State. I mean, for starters, right here. Glaciers are growing on the Nisqually Glacier on Mount Rainier. The Emmons Glacier on Mount Rainier is growing. And in a few minutes ago, you mentioned Mount St. Helens. Well, back when Mount St. Helens erupted, there was a great big glacier on Mount St. Helens that melted, and of course all of the mud and debris and glacial melt rushed down the Toutle River, and they had a great flood. Well, you don't hear this very often, but that glacier on Mount St. Helens has come roaring back. It is now bigger than it was back when the mountain erupted. But we're not hearing that, so I'm trying to get that word out. Or take California, for instance, on Mount Shasta. There are 7 glaciers. All 7 of those glaciers are growing. So I'll be talking about that for one of the things.
Could you give us an update on some of the things happening in the news? With the snowstorms, and there's also the report about the temperatures shooting up about 100 degrees. And the possibility of flooding is certainly on many of our minds. Give us an overview of some of the stuff that's just transpired in the last week.
Well, in the last few weeks, certainly, we've been having record snow around the world, record snow in Korea, record snow in the United Kingdom, record snow in Europe, record snow across the United States. So you're absolutely right. Now the Weather Service is warning that this spring could have record floods because of the record snows, especially if the snow melts rapidly. So, and when you talk about the 100-degree changes, yes, there's areas of the country that last week were like minus 30 degrees, and then this week they hit a 70 degrees. I mean, a 100-degree change is amazing. That, to me, is another indication of heading into an ice age, because as we headed into at least the previous little ice ages, we know that there were extremes in both directions. For instance, during the Little Ice Age of about in the 1600s, there were areas of the world that had the biggest drought in 500 years. And then later that year, those same areas had the biggest snowstorms in 300 years. So same area, same year. So that's one of the marks of heading into an ice age, is those extremes.
And when that happens, we see issues with the crops, which affect civilization.
Oh, absolutely. That is a big one, because one of the things I say is that even if we're not covered with ice, one of my biggest concerns is that we could be fighting in the streets for food long before we're covered with ice. And I think we're beginning to see that happen. I mean, this is not something I'll be talking about, I guess, next week, but in Egypt, some of the recent uprisings had to do with the high cost of food. I think we're going to be seeing the cost of food shoot way, way higher.
Yeah, and I agree that food storage is very, very important at this time. And also bird navigation. This situation with, well, for example, the different animals popping up, or geese, birds in places where they normally aren't, but also sea life. There's all these shows on TV now on all these strange forms of life that they're finding in the ocean, and I'm sure that's related to this shift as well.
Yes, because that is one of the things that I talk about, is that this is related to magnetic reversals, because magnetic reversals, those also occur in a cycle, and they seem to occur in sync with the Ice Age cycle. Now, I have heard a lot of scientists say that the last magnetic reversal occurred about 780,000 years ago. But that is way, way off the mark. There was the Gothenburg magnetic reversal of 11,500 years ago. There was the Mono Lake magnetic reversal of 23,000 years ago. There was the Lake Mungo magnetic reversal of 33,500 years ago. And the list goes on and on. About every 11,500 years is what I'm seeing. Now, that is not all of them. I can't prove there's been one every 11,500 years, but I see enough of them that recur according to that cycle that I think will eventually will eventually prove that cycle. And that cycle, for whatever reason, what I see is as our magnetic field strength declines as we head into a reversal, and by the way, it is declining right now, but as our magnetic field strength declines, I think it somehow holds tectonic forces in check. And so as it declines, we start seeing more and more earthquakes. We start seeing more and more volcanic activity, and that's what we're seeing. So I don't think it's an accident.
Enter the sun, and people are talking about this every day at a level that I've never seen before. And the article I wrote on my 29th birthday, almost exactly 2 years ago, on February 25th, 2009. And it spread viral and got published in Nexus. And it went viral just simply because we're going to see these patterns and share information about how these things are connected. And now I'm looking at a second report that I want to write on the potential effects of the sun truly on man, and looking at these cycles of war. And it's something that's fascinating me, because I know that there are people that have studied this, although it may not be aware of by the general population, but they were looking at the sun and its effect on cycles of war, strangeness in the battlefield. A Russian scientist around 1917, was also the year of the Bolshevik Revolution, was looking at these sunspots in some sort of a telescope or whatever instrument he was using, and then making observations on what these strange behaviors in man. And Bob, I'm seeing strange behaviors in man right now, and we just had the biggest X-class solar flare in 4 years.
Well, I don't know what the solar flare does or doesn't, but I do know, and I mentioned this in not by fire but by ice. But there is a little ice age cycle that seems to go along with the sunspots. The little ice age cycle returns about every 360 years, and again, this is backed by science, but not very many scientists. But there's something called a solar retrograde cycle. So this would kind of fit in with what you're talking about. But about every 180 years, Saturn and Jupiter end up being in the same quadrant of the solar system at the same time. And for whatever reason, they tug on the sun. Their gravitational force tugs on the sun and pulls it out of its regular orbit just by a little bit, because the sun has its own little tiny orbit. But it pulls it out of that just a little tiny bit. And what they have found is that every 180 years, going along with that cycle, is that it gets cooler on Earth. Well, when you double that cycle every 360 years, we seem to enter into a little ice age. And this little ice age cycle correlates with the downfall of the Roman Empire. It correlates with the downfall of the Grecian Empire, of the Sumerian Empire, of the Egyptian Empire a long time ago. So, because with this cycle, you end up having drought, you end up in some areas of the country, of the world, you end up having excess precipitation, and it just messes with the food cycle. And so, yeah, then people start having wars, fighting for food. So, this concerns me.
There's a picture we're going to show. This is from NASA. Graphic number 44. This is a transformer map, the United States. And what you're seeing here, it shows a bunch of red dots, Bill, and it's the transformer graphic. And maybe Alex can find that. But that deals with all of the dots right here, these high risk areas for a grid meltdown. And we see Portland here. We see other major cities. Texas doesn't seem to be as vulnerable as some of the other states. It's going to be very interesting, Bob, because I think I read something today about China having some sort of communication problem as a result of the last solar flare.
I didn't see that, but I do remember, what was it, 1989, when they had a huge solar flare, and it essentially shut down the electric grid in Canada.
Yeah, in Toronto.
And so there's no reason why that couldn't happen again.
The other thing about cycles of war in the sun is in 1859, the Civil War started in the United States. That was also the same year that the grid went down in some parts of the country. What do you know about that particular event?
I don't know anything about that event, but you know, it's interesting is I'm also, my wife and I are considering visiting Italy this spring, and we've been watching shows on that, and it turns out that the Italian Revolution, Italy used to be a whole bunch of little tiny principalities and little tiny countries, and they had their battles and pulled all of those areas into one country by the name of Italy at the same time that we were having our civil war. So that would be another thing for you to include in your record there, at least, that was happening at the same time.
But as far as the Northwest, and you're residing here in the Northwest up in Washington, how do you see things changing here?
Well, to be honest, I've been looking in the Portland and Vancouver area for a place to live. Haven't done it yet, but I do have food storage in that area, so in case I have to leave here in a hurry, I do have that. But during the last ice age, Seattle was covered with 4,000 feet of ice, straight up, 4,000 feet deep, 4/5 of a mile. That's almost hard to comprehend. But that ice only extended as far south as Olympia. And when you got 150 miles south of Olympia, temperatures were only about 7 degrees colder than they are right now. So, to my way of thinking, the Portland area is going to be a safe, comparatively safe area. You know, I don't know about the earthquakes and all of that, but I don't believe that Portland will be having the kinds of earthquakes that other parts of the country may be having, and I don't think it's going to be covered with snow or ice. So I think in that respect, I would say it's a good place. The people coming there, something is leading them correctly.
There's a book called The New Madrid Run, and it is available at the Portland Preparedness Center. And have you read this book?
No, I have not.
I haven't yet. I flipped through parts of it. Seems to be one of Richard's best sellers, but it deals with a hypothetical future event where an earthquake splits the country, the United States. The thing is, Oregon's not underwater in this book that was based on a vision. Oregon, parts of the Northwest, it becomes an island. And I actually picked up the book and flipped to a random page, one of the only pages where they were talking about Oregon, being curious when I picked up the book if it talked about Oregon, and then saw that there and went, huh. That would be interesting if, in a theoretical situation, maybe that's why some people have been drawn here that do want to live a self-sustainable, self-sustaining lifestyle. But things are definitely going to have to shift quite a bit in Portland for us to be self-sufficient because of the food situation and the dependency on fossil fuels.
Yeah, you mentioned the New Madrid. I mentioned the New Madrid earthquake. In not by fire but by ice, because there was a huge earthquake there, and I can't remember when. I think in the 1700s, but where even though it was at the New Madrid Fault, the church bells were ringing in Boston. It was such a big earthquake, and the cracks opened up in the ground that were so wide that a horse could not jump those cracks. And there was a lake, and I'm not thinking of the name of the lake right now. I think it may have been called Reelfoot Lake, but there was this area, part of the ground that just sunk, and water rushed in, and all of a sudden there was a lake that is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and of course there's somebody just sent me an email about an hour ago that there were earthquakes in Arkansas this morning, apparently near the New Madrid Fault. So I don't see the the world splitting in half or the United States becoming. I don't see that at all. Mm-hmm. But I do see more earthquakes coming, and the earthquake activity, as I said, does correlate with this same cycle of ice ages, and correlates with the same cycle of magnetic reversals. It correlates with something called precession of the equinoxes. So it all ties together with astronomical forces that we have no control over whatsoever.
Now, as we experience different types of radiation coming into the planet, I certainly feel that affects human biological systems and also forms of life. And you touch upon this in your book, major shifts at certain points in time where biological life on Earth of different forms changes dramatically overnight into something anew. Tell us more about this idea.
I do, and of course, the people who believe in Darwin don't especially appreciate my take on this. But Darwin talked about how evolution works slow and drawn out in stately steps, and no, in my studies for the first book, and Not by Fire but by Ice, I kept noticing that yes, we had extinctions at magnetic reversals, but the other part is that immediately after those extinctions and immediately after the magnetic reversals, brand new kinds of plants and animals suddenly appeared on this planet that had never been here before. It was not slow and gradual, it was sudden. And in my studies, when I read work by paleontologists, I think probably every paleontologist in the world would agree that the changes happened rapidly. Well, maybe not everyone, but a lot of paleontologists. I know I quote Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, and I quote Robert Bacher at the University of Colorado, and I quote so many different scientists who have seen those jumps. Well, our magnetic field protects us from that radiation that you're talking about. It protects us from the radiation from space, and as our magnetic field strength declines, as we head into a magnetic reversal, we lose that magnetic shielding, and off we go into that. To me is what causes evolutionary leaps. Is their mutations
now,
essentially.
Leave it on this graphic here, and these are the contour lines of over North America here, and we see magnetic zero west of Portland, crossing into Alaska here. And Greg Braden wrote a little bit about this, and it's very interesting for those that live in Portland, because Portland is not far from magnetic zero, and he talks about a number of things here in terms of, he's asked, do you have any idea how this magnetic shift might change consciousness? And he responds that the speculation is that there is a correlation between consciousness and magnetics. In order to understand how this connection might work, it's useful to compare it to a computer's memory. The magnetic fields in the memory are held in place through an electrical charge, a trickle charge within the computer itself. When the batteries in the computer die, the charge is gone and the memory is lost. We have to reload the operating system. In a similar way, by researchers and descendants of native peoples believe that the Earth, when the Earth goes through what science sees as a magnetic reversal, it also will be a great shift in cleansing of the Earth's consciousness. There will be nothing holding all the magnetic patterns that have been put in place. So when we awaken from this shift, what becomes consciousness will be our truest nature, our truest essence, and the memory of all the evil, or all the bad things, or all the grudges, or the ego, and we've held against one another as individuals and nations, will not be part of that new consciousness, that new grid. Now, the part that I really wanted to get into was when he's talking about magnetic north, and and the West Coast. He says, when we think about the West Coast, we think about wacky California, where the truth is California is a seed, one of several, and it's traditionally been very innovative in technology, science, fashion, finance, and the arts because there's an opportunity for tremendous change there. Within North America, the flip side of that would be in an area of high magnetics, where the magnetic fields are the most dense. And when you find this through some of the southeastern states, the very states that are traditionally viewed as being conservative. That doesn't mean that change can't happen there. And then he also gets into how does this affect people. It affects people in positive ways and negative ways, cycles of war and also cycles of consciousness. Bob, this just keeps getting exciting every day, the more we find out about this stuff.
I don't know about that stuff, but I can believe that something could change.
Well, I think we're going to be around to see it. We are living in interesting times. In the last 5 minutes, we'll wrap up with you. People want to be told or explained in the simplest of ways, what is the evidence behind the possibility of a pole shift, moving it to this direction, the potential that we're going through this. And then the other second question is that a quick shift with the poles shifting in some sort of a flip, or like some scientists are saying, something that's incremental and not something that's going to flip anything, but it'll just be incremental over thousands of years. Your take on all of this?
There's big questions about both of those. There's an article that just came out, and I posted it on my website, but it came out on January 17th from the British Geological Survey, that they are building a new way of tracking the magnetic field down in South Georgia Island, because they're studying what's called the South Atlantic anomaly. But anyway, they say that in the South Atlantic anomaly is that the magnetic field strength has been declining rapidly, and they say that they believe this could be an indication of a magnetic reversal. So all of a sudden, I'm not alone on this, and the people who believe in this are not alone, because that comes from the British Geological Survey just on the 17th of January. As to how fast it would begin, yes, I've heard of a lot of scientists say that a magnetic reversal takes like thousands of years. But in Central Oregon, there's a mountain there by the name of STEEMIT Mountain, which I've not been to, but I've read studies about that, because there were scientists from the University of California, Santa Barbara, who went to STEEMIT Mountain to study magnetic reversals. What they essentially do is when magma comes out of a volcano, it's so hot that it's non-magnetic, and then as it cools below what's called the Curie temperature, it takes on the magnetic field of the day. And I'll simplify this, but what they can do is they can drill a hole into this lava, and they can drop a compass down there, and they can see which way it was north at the time it erupted. Well, in STEEMIT Mountain, they're in south central Oregon, when they drilled their hole at the edge of the lava flow, their compasses pointed in one direction. When they drilled their hole in the center of the lava flow, their compasses pointed in a different direction, which would indicate that the magnetic reversal occurred in the difference of time it took from the for the outside edges to cool as opposed to the inside edges. They're therefore saying, and I think it's a scientist by the name of Coe and Prevost, and I can't remember the other one, but anyway, they're saying that a magnetic reversal based on that could have occurred in as little as 30 days.
Wow.
That would be major.
So there's a study going on there right now, or that was a study that was done?
That was done back in like 1989 or 1990, back like then. It really, no one has picked up on it very much, but I do talk about it in the book, and not by fire but by ice. Okay,
let's talk about the two websites you have and some of the information they can get. So the first one's Ice Age Now.
IceAgeNow.com. I update it daily, and we get around 6,000 or 7,000 hits a day, so I know that people are watching it. And then the other one is evolutionaryleaps.com. And that one I stick pretty much to stuff about evolution.